This is a presentation on writing your evaluation plan for your grant proposal. This is geared to the Human Services kind of agency with the Human Services kind of program as the program for the grant proposal. I'm Reggie York, University of North Carolina, Wilmington. First question I pose to you is, what is evaluation? Think about it a minute. I would say evaluation refers to the measurement of worth. This is a very broad definition of evaluation. We'll get into the specifics later, but that's basically what we're talking about. Was this thing worthwhile? What is the worth of this thing that is being evaluated? To measure worth, you must compare something with something else. You can't just throw out one piece of data and make sense of it. For example, let's look at this. What if you conduct a client satisfaction survey and learn that 67% of your clients said they were fundamentally satisfied with the services they had received? Is this good news or bad news? Think about that for a moment. Well, I would say we don't have a reference point here. We don't have something to compare the 67% to. When I ask students in my class, is this good news or bad news? Some of them will say it's good news, some of them will say it's bad news, and they'll have some kind of figure in mind that they're comparing 67% to. But it differs from one person to the next. So if you are doing a client satisfaction survey as a part of an evaluation, you need to have a context by which you're comparing this. If it's true that it's normal for clients in your sphere to be satisfied only at 40% of the time, and you compare your 67% to that 40%, now you have something to talk about in regard to evaluation, meaning worth. I would say, by the way, the last statement about is this a good evaluation study, I would say that normally client satisfaction is not a good way to evaluate services. You need to measure client behavior more directly. Client behavior being focused upon as the intended outcome of the service. Evaluation normally focuses on client outcome, not service process. You normally do not state your objective as to provide quality services because this does not refer to client outcome. Instead, you might say your objective is to improve self-esteem or reduce depression or improve school grades and so forth. All of those focus on client outcome. Does evaluation help in any of these ways? First of all, does it help in justifying to the funding source that the funds they gave were well spent, or the funds they will give will be well spent? Well, I would say yes. Number two, does it help in helping your agency to know how well the services have worked? Don't you want to know that as well? Of course, you do, or you should want to know that. How about helping your agency to get clues about what needs to be improved, or what might need to be improved? I would say that's another way that evaluation can help. Let's talk a little bit about objectives and evaluation. I've already mentioned that you should evaluate the achievement of it. So you should be sure to have the evaluation in mind when you write the objectives. Be sure to measure the achievement of your objective in your evaluation plan. So whenever you're writing an objective, ask yourself, how will I evaluate this? And make sure you have in your mind how you're going to do that. So let's look at that in a little bit more detail. If one of your objectives is to instill a sense of well-being in isolated senior citizens, do you have to have a means for measuring well-being in your evaluation plan? Or is a client satisfaction survey usually sufficient to measure an objective like the above? What do you think? I would say that having a measure of well-being would be the thing to do. You may even find that as you think about well-being, you will start thinking about, well, what does this mean in more tangible terms? Are you talking about life satisfaction? Are you talking about depression, anxiety? There may be other things that are a little bit more specific than the concept of well-being, and you may then indicate be interested in changing your objective to one of those concepts that are a little bit easier to evaluate. I would say client satisfaction survey is usually not a good way to measure an objective in general. Client satisfaction surveys tend to ask clients, were you satisfied with the services you received? And client satisfaction surveys typically have very positive results uniformly, regardless of how effective we know a service is based on other information that we have. Former clients typically and current clients typically want to be nice to you because they appreciate the fact that you've tried to help. So it's not a great way to measure satisfaction. I mean, to measure client outcome, because it's not a direct measure of outcome. It's not a direct measure of depression. Give a person a depression scale to measure that. Before and after service, and then see how much of a gain there was. What's wrong with this picture? Your objective is to enhance school performance for at-risk middle school students, and you will measure self-esteem before and after the intervention as an evaluation of the service. Pause for a moment and ask yourself, what's wrong with this? Well, the objective is to improve school performance. Self-esteem is not a measure of school performance. Grades is an example of school performance. Whether a person gets in trouble, whether a person has lots of absences from school, those are the kinds of things that might be viewed as indicators of school performance. Self-esteem is not. So there's not an appropriate connection between the objective and what is being measured. What about this objective? Your objective is to enhance the quality of life for senior citizens, and you will measure client satisfaction with services as an evaluation of this objective. What's wrong here? I would say the first problem is that the objective is not well stated. You should not say the objective is to enhance the quality of life, because quality of life is just very vague. It can mean just about anything anybody wants it to mean. I would say also that client satisfaction surveys is not a good way to evaluate something. So that's got two major problems with it. What about this picture? Your objective is to enhance school performance for at-risk African American males in middle school by giving them a high school mentor to work with them in various ways, like tutoring, field trips to learn about history, and so forth. You will measure the leadership growth of the mentors as a way of achieving this objective. Pause for a minute and ask yourself, what's wrong with this picture? Well, the problem here is the objective is to enhance school performance for at-risk middle African American males. You need to be measuring school performance for them. You shouldn't be measuring something about the mentors. So if your program is a mentor development program, and your objective is to improve leadership skills of mentors, that's your objective. If that were the case, then of course measuring leadership growth would be an appropriate way of measuring or of evaluating the achievement of that objective. You should be realistic when you think about the objectives and the thing that you will and how you will measure their effectiveness. Be sure as you're thinking about the objectives and defining them that you think about the tools you might use to evaluate their achievement. So be realistic both in regard to what could reasonably be expected as your outcome for your service, and whether you have the resources. I'll jump the gun here a little bit. The question here is, do you have the resources to measure things? Do you have access to the necessary information? Do you have the staff who can collect and analyze the data? So be realistic about what can be achieved. Don't use a really small service to try to make a profound change in people's lives. Think about what is a realistic outcome of this particular program. Here are some of the tasks of evaluation. First, understand the nature of the objective that is being evaluated, so you'll be in a position to think about how to measure its outcome. Find a tool for measuring progress in regard to the objective. I would say you should look for published scales and tools first. Now, if you have something simple like school grades, that's a very easy one to measure, of course. But if you want to measure self-esteem or depression or anxiety, go to the published scales on this and come up with something there rather than developing your own, unless the published scales are just not appropriate or feasible for that. So you find the tool, then you secure your data, you analyze your data, and you report the results. When you when you secure the data, you think about what kind of an evaluation design will you have. Will you give clients a scale before the service begins and again at the end, and measure growth? That's one way that you would secure data. There are various other ways too, but that's a typical way to do that. Of course, you have to analyze your data to see whether the clients did achieve growth, and also whether the data suggested that the amount of growth was statistically significant. Example number 1, objective to improve self-esteem for at-risk middle school students. The service is 8 weekly group sessions. The measure is the Hare Self-Esteem Scale. Data collection, clients will be given the scale one time before the first service meeting and one time again at the end of the last group meeting. Data results, the mean self-esteem score was higher at the service, at the beginning of the service, was higher at the beginning of the service than at the end, and the difference was statistically significant. Example number 2, reduce incidence of rehospitalizations. Service a new protocol for follow-up of discharge plans. The measure is proportion of patients readmitted within 6 months of discharge as compared to the 6-month readmissions for last year, which was before the new program, the new protocol was instituted. Here are the results. The proportion of patients readmitted this year was 26% as compared to a readmission rate of 38% last year. I should add that it was statistically significant. That's important. Should you hire an outside consultant, you will usually conduct your evaluation with current staff, but you might need an outside evaluator. Outside evaluators are more likely needed if your objectives and evaluation plan is complex, requiring special expertise. A small grant is not likely going to rely on an outside consultant because you don't usually have the money to pay them. You must clearly understand the evaluation information, whether you use an outside consultant or not. The information must be useful to you and the funding source. Here's a summary. You must include in your evaluation plan a means of measuring progress in regard to the program's outcome objectives. Your evaluation plan should be realistic in regard to what you can expect to achieve and have the resources to collect and analyze data. Your measure of outcome must be concrete. So most people usually use a quantitative kind of measure like a self-esteem scale or something of that nature, rather than just asking some people to give some opinions and then summarizing what they said. Okay, this is the end of the presentation, and I hope this was helpful to you.